Good morning. Welcome to the Explicit Measures Podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone. I just have an observation. Just when I start this, I'm usually the one because I'm the one controlling the show here. Like I'm starting things off. I'm usually the one smiling, looking at the camera. I wonder how many of these Tommy's looking to the left or the right, just kind of like just looking around.
Well, I'm the guy who's posting, so actually people know where to go.
If they don't know where to go now, they're not interested in listening.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Well, like I keep hearing, the funny thing is if somebody transitions from the listening podcast to like a Tuesday or Thursday morning,
An actual video one.
they'll be like, well, I thought they said there was a video. Like, where's the link? And we're like, yeah, we don't play that. we just pop in, and you'll just like you got to keep sitting on YouTube and refresh.
Which is basically what I'm trying to do.
Actually,
to get the
no,
link.
that's not the case, right? Like if you're subscribed.
If you're a subscriber, you'll get a notification when we're live. Yes.
But if you're on your computer, it's all messed up. Like we would schedule them, but that's when all of our issues happen. That's why I'm always looking to the left, frantically typing. It's over here.
Okay. So. We have some ideas in the future. We'll potentially smooth out this video streaming live thing with some more notifications and scheduling of meetings.
If you ever hear us do advertising, it's not for our bank. It's so we can actually get a better service, so we can schedule things
exactly
out.
Right. Exactly. Reinvest everything.
And at least on Tuesdays, my excuse is I'm just breathing exercises, just to
make
sure that the Happy Tuesday is just right.
Just right.
Just right.
That was better than most.
That was better than most. That's a 7.5 out of 10.
Are you David Portney?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm. Not only do I rate pizzas, I rate your Happy Morning Tuesdays. Amazing, awesome. So any kind of quick openers here? Any kind of announcements, news, things that came out that are interesting to check out?
Yeah, I got some beef.
You got some beef?
We'll bring it beef too.
I got some beef today.
Hey, all right. Maybe that's a good intro too. Bring the beef.
Bring the beef.
What's your beef? What's your beef? Or news? One or the other.
You would never be short of topics there. Well, so we're doing a lot of projects with Dataverse Dynamics. So trying to connect to that, put a lot of visualizations, put a lot of projects into reporting. And immediately we've run into a lot of different issues where either the entities or tables are very ambiguous to try to find. Two, there's like 3 or 4 different ways to connect to the Dataverse.
And
C. Oh. Yeah, have I messed that up? 1, 2,
no.
and C?
Yeah. 1, 3, C.
1, B, and 3. Yes. So, and then our third problem here is it's very limited on the amount of data that you can pull back, because it's either the number. This is basically like the number of megabytes that you can pull, or the number of kilobytes. It's not even the number of rows. So I don't know if anyone else has run into this problem where either it loads incredibly long. There's a few posts on LinkedIn about actually putting in like a remove query folder or remove like any relationship columns, but that's still running into a lot of issues of every table that we pull back has like 290 columns. And it's absolutely insane. Yeah.
Dynamics tables are very, or Dataverse columns or columns are very wide tables. It makes sense.
It strikes me as Dynamics is a perfect example of what would happen if you unleashed business users into the database.
That's a good point.
Because all it does is just tack on columns and
tack on tables. You can just tack on anything you want anywhere.
Entities.
Yeah. That's a true statement.
And it definitely makes it. Well, Salesforce does the same thing, right? Like
that's true.
It's like, oh, you want to do this? Yeah, we'll create a relationship. No problem.
No governance whatsoever.
So, it's been a while, but there was a third-party plugin that I used, Tommy, that gives you like the relationships behind the scenes, which was like paramount when I did it. And the reason for that is, yes, one of the largest challenges with connecting to Dynamics CRM are all of the linked entities, right? That just carry in, that will kill your performance. You can't refresh anything. So from the get-go, right, in that, remove all of those columns. But the problem is you have to rebuild the relational database in the Power BI report. You do, or you reshape it by like rebuilding the connections, merging those tables, and then creating a data model out of that.
Mhm.
Like
Well,
it can be
yeah.
messy.
So get this. So there's a template on Microsoft about connecting to like marketing email performance. It's literally on the Microsoft website, a PBIT file. There's a few prerequisites. You're like, okay, fine. Oh, you need an Azure blob set up. You're like, okay, that sounds weird. Why do I have to do that? So you download this template. Takes forever to load. Turns out there's 215 tables they load into this table.
Oh my word.
This is from Microsoft. And this is not from a third party. This is literally on the Microsoft website on how to get your email performance. 215 tables, which you're trying to like audit through this. Like, so when do you think we could get a report? I'm like,
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what's coming from Azure. So yeah, it's very interesting that you would consider. And I'll yeah, send me info about that template or the plugin, because there's all these like hack ways to get there, but I don't know why it's so difficult.
I definitely feel
Yeah,
like
I get it.
this is a very common pattern. I mean, I've worked with a number of ERP systems or things that software developers build, whether it's like, large systems, medium, small systems, every single one of them, it's built for the developers of the software.
Mhm.
Doesn't really matter. And Dynamics feels very much the same. It's built for what the UI needs on the application side. Plain and simple. But
Right.
that means a lot of unique tables that may not be very wide or may have a lot of wide columns, but the application knows how to easily get through those. And the application typically is doing like I guess we would call it like a point lookup. I'm looking up a single row of data. Go to this table, find this row, resolve that data back to me. That's kind of what the application does. And there's just lots of people using it and making lots of different rows of data. In reporting, we don't care to see only one row of data. In reporting, or particularly coming out of Salesforce and Dynamics, you want to see trends on entire tables. So the entire paradigm of look at this one row, go to this table, find this one row of data is totally different. We're trying to compute across the whole thing, and this is where I think if you go into these situations thinking I don't need a data warehouse, I can make a data mart directly to the source system, I think you're in a position that you're going to be overdeveloping the data mart too much, and you're going to be causing rework in the future. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't put in place well, maybe I did extract data from CRM into a place where I can modify. But this is like what I would recommend, Tommy, is iterate a lot, right? Use your initial Power BI file as a discovery tool to figure
Totally.
out like what you need to pull in,
Yes.
and how fast you can do that, because
Right.
you don't want to rely on any of the inbuilt relationships that it derives, because it that's where everything bogs down.
And
I did find it, and I pasted it
yeah,
in our chat.
the
If we want to
related
post that
records.
out, we can. It's
Yeah.
called XRM Toolbox.
Oh yeah.
So that thing plugs into your CRM environment, dumps you out in Excel. From what I remember, it was immensely helpful because it allows you to understand how the system linked tables together, and then you can remove all of those linked entities or see them actually as well in there, and it will make your life 10 times easier.
Yeah, because I think our plan is going to probably take some of the main tables, push them into SQL rather than that direct connection to a database. Because there's three ways you can connect to Dataverse from SQL. There's actually a SQL connection, OData, or that direct connection.
Mm-hmm.
And they all do different things or pull in different column names, which is absolutely insane. But yeah, I've heard of the XRM toolbox, and I'll check that out.
But I would agree with Mike. Like if there's a quick pull it into SQL, like do that first, and then shape it. Otherwise, you're just going to be battling this constant.
Yes.
I'm joining three tables together in Power BI to get the one value I need.
And I definitely,
and then it just becomes it's not a model anymore. It's
correct.
Just your relational database in Power BI.
I mean, of the tools, and again, I'm a business user, so I'm coming from the business world of things. So I love Power Query. It seems to meet a lot of my needs. A lot of the data transformation things that I want to get done are easily handled with M. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll connect to the data source, because Power BI can connect to anything. It's easy to get in and connect to this stuff. So what I'll do is I'll connect to Power BI with Power BI to a data source, bring in tables, and then I'll start trying to figure out, okay, and I explained to my customers, there's this concept of like, we have to bridge this gap between what does the data say, like what is in the data, versus how do I answer questions about the data that makes relevant answers for my business, right? The business is asking, what's my top salesperson? What's the number of sales per customer? There's general questions they're asking, and you have to kind of walk that path from both sides. What questions do I want to ask, and what can the data support? Because not every question you ask is going to be able to be discoverable from the information that's in your data. So it's a bit of a cat and mouse game a little bit. So I love going to desktop. I love just pulling data in. I'll rip tables apart. I'll make unique stuff. I'll do star schema stuff. I mean, I'll do all kinds of crazy manipulations inside Power Query, knowing the fact that this is all about discovery. And once I understand how the data shapes together, Power Query documents every single step I did. Here's what I need to do. I need these columns from this table. I need to merge that with this other information. We know how to get there. Like, we know how it works. So, anyways, that's
It's
how
very
I.
disappointing. Microsoft's direct product doesn't play well with this other direct product.
Well,
It's two different teams, though. Like,
They're at the same conference. They're part of the same keynote.
You mean they took over the same conference?
Where's that presentation? What it actually takes to connect to CRM?
Yeah, exactly right.
They're
It
literally
can be
part of the
painful,
same
but I will
keynote.
say, Tommy, like the minute you remove those linked relationships,
should speed up things.
you go rebuild them, and it changes completely. I mean,
Cool.
in the past, the fast iteration was I actually kind of built the relational database in the model because I mean it's dynamics data. It's not like you're hitting volumes, or at least I didn't, right?
Yeah.
So whatever. All
True
right,
statement.
cool, good opener. Yay,
good
yay,
intro.
dynamic CRM.
The only other opener I have this morning would be, I believe, if you go edit reports, and again, I don't recommend that you edit reports in the Power BI service, but I think I saw a Twitter tweet this morning around the new visualization pane with the new buttons and the new layout of how that works. I think has now reached the PowerBI.com service. Now, it may have been there for a while. I don't know. Maybe someone just found it this morning, but I jumped into PowerBI.com and double checked it myself. Yes, there's the new visualization pane is now officially inside the service at this point. So if you're not familiar with that, I'm sure there's going to be some articles, or there'll be at least there are existing articles on the Microsoft blog that talk about that. I'll see if I can snag one of those articles and bring it up here for everyone so they can see that one as well. So, anyways, just an interesting note there. I don't really like the new format pane. I mean, it's been a little bit. It's okay to me. I think I'm getting used to it. I've been trying to force myself to use it more and more. Things were named different. The thing that throws me off the most is stuff was named differently than what I originally looked for stuff. So when I'm looking for things and the names physically changed, that threw me off. That's really my main gripe of like that tool, like the update there is I just can't find things anymore, and I feel
you can move something fine.
You can move it, yeah, regroup it, okay, not a problem. But when you rename stuff, that's where I'm like, oh man. But that's just me being an old stingy person because I was there when the tool was made. So like kind of thing. Anyways, those are the only other.
I don't know. I'm still struggling with effects in background. It's like, is that an effect? I guess it's an effect.
Oh yeah, that's another one exactly. Or even the page, like it's not called a page anymore. It's called a canvas.
Yeah.
So like I'm always like, I go to the canvas now to adjust the size of the canvas as opposed to the page. I'm like, it's still a page, but
it's great for demos.
Whatever.
Like, just hold on 1 sec.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please hold. Let me figure out where I was.
Let me figure out how Power BI works.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm an MVP.
I look incredibly sharp with that on there as well. All right, let's if anybody else got any openers, I think we're good. Let's go into our main topic for the day. All right, main topic for the day. Actually, we're going to follow an article. Tommy brought the article to us. He found this one, and I guess Tommy, it would be good to kick off the intro. Give us a little bit of details. What are we reviewing today?
And every so often, there's an article that, if you dive into it enough, I think can be skill changing. And for me, this was one of them. It's the I think he's an instructor. His name's Enrico Bertini, and he works in New York. And the title of the article is
say it right, Tommy.
I did Bertini.
No, say it like
Enrico?
say it like you'd say it back in Italy.
Enrico Bertini. This is not the glorious bastard. Yeah. a foul. Well, no, yeah. Like anyone,
Awesome.
there's a stereotype right there.
There you go.
So
We love our Italians on this channel.
we love our Italians. There's enough of them, but there could be more. Anyways, thanks for pulling me off. I was on a roll. Appreciate that. We're gonna edit this out. The
Fix it in post.
title of the article is "Asking the Right Data Questions and Asking the Data Questions Right," which immediately sounds a little confusing, but really the core of this is we talk a heck of a bunch about asking questions and trying to get the insights and what are your insights. But this really breaks down that answer that you get and really us realizing, okay, you gave me an answer for what you want to do with this. But there's a whole other side of this that's a skill set we need on can I break that down and then visualize this? So a good example of this is just it gives it in here is when you get when you get one of the questions like, well, how did the situation change over time? If someone's looking at their sales performance, or we want to look at risk partners. Okay, that's great. But our job is not so much just to get that type of question or to try to get that insight, but we have to break that down, or as they call it, operationalize it, where there's parts of that to measure. What does situation mean? How long does over time mean? And it really makes us start thinking about not just getting people to ask the right questions or getting our stakeholders to really begin to explain what they need, but how then do we need to break that down into what we call tasks? What tasks do we need to perform from that? So I'll lay it out there because there's obviously a lot more to this conversation, but just that core, this is a phenomenal article.
I definitely agree.
Yeah.
And this dovetails very well in what we was just discussing about like ERP,
Yeah.
going to like reporting. It starts dovetailing in this. And as I read the article, I'm hearing a lot of similarities between what I communicate around, define the insight, drive for action. I think there's also, if I had to reading between the lines of this article a little bit, this feels a bit to me like you could almost put the flavor on it. Does this report make me money or save me money? Like these are some questions I feel like I could ask of myself as I'm going through these report investigation processes. So really like this one.
This was a fun read, Tommy, because I think this allows us to take a moment and talk about refinement,
Mhm.
right? Like we've talked a lot about asking the right question, making sure you're engaging, understanding the business, and I think this will be an interesting conversation because it allows us to just say, slow down a little bit. You guys talk about asking questions, all the time,
Right.
engaging with the business. What does that mean? Right, and really what are we after? And I
Yeah.
think he does a really good job of clarifying some of those key points, right? Because it's dialed into us as the report, you know author, or I'm sorry, developer now,
Developer.
that that we find the right information, right? Because you can have conversations with people and say, hey, okay, what do you want? What sort of information do you need? And if you don't get the detail that you require to build something, you're going to leave the conversation, go back, look up a few things, and then get stuck, right? So I think, some of the highlights within here that I picked out and love, and we'll walk through them, I'm sure, are, you know, uh, the flow of questions lead to the information you need, and
Yes.
then you start defining visuals. I think another really good point he makes right in the beginning is like define what the goal is,
Yes.
and I'll dive into like how I think that branches well outside this conversation later. But like define the goal, like what is it we're trying to accomplish?
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of that dovetails into the previous conversation we've had, even with report type. What kind of report? Like he's talking specific visualizations, but I think it drives that conversation around what is the intent of the report? Like, what are we specifically going after? Because some Power BI reports, especially the ones that take a lot of time, are very focused,
Right.
Yes.
and we allow the conversation to get a little too broad. But
Yes.
if we have the goal in mind, I think that to me helps to provide clarity around how you start to frame the questions, and then also what you define as a parking lot item, right? Like
Yes.
you're always going to come up with more stuff in these conversations, but having that focus is is paramount, I think.
But even
Um,
I'm gonna go in there a little bit more there because I really like that this concept of describing the goal. I think if we're doing a good job reporting, right? I think we're doing a good job of explaining on various pages of the report. And right now, I'm in a design mode where I'm more apt to have one or two visuals per page, but do a better job of adding like a text box, a description. Here's what this page is showing. Here's how you read this visual, and do a bit more explanation. Like, I'm answering this question. And I think to your point, Seth, sometimes we build reports and we just throw them out there assuming people know how to read the information and get to the answer, or answer like we're designing this page with an intent to have a specific question in mind. There like that is a common, I don't know, visualization build that I'm doing very frequently now. And so coming in with this idea of like, hey, I need to know what sales are like and how far away are we from delivering any of this product, right? There's some key questions that I put together, and I fabricate visuals together that help me answer that. And then I write a description. Here's what, I'm answering this question and being very specific about it. Because if someone comes to that page and says, well, this doesn't tell me XYZ, okay, that's fine, but that's a different question than what we're trying to ask right now. This is how this page answers this particular question.
Well, it's really another level than that. I mean, there's a book tied to the article called "Making Data Visual,"
Mhm.
and there's a gem of a chapter in here is basically about operationalizing a question. So
Yes.
take your example,
Mhm.
right, where it's like, yeah, there's a goal. Since I've read this, there's been part of like almost like another facet of my mind that's opened up since I've had even stakeholder meetings since I've read the article, where it's not just getting someone's goal, right? Where they say, we want to, our question is who are the top performing salespeople over the last 6 months? Well, just that question in itself, or any of the questions that we get, it's breaking it down and really making it a concrete question
Yeah.
that we can link to a visual. Yeah, we can have a goal, but we have to define a lot of things where a call yesterday, someone's like, we need to be able to track goals getting pushed where people are doing these particular tasks. It's like, okay, well, let's define the goal. I- We a lot of times we just take someone's insight that they want and we say, yeah, I'll just transform that into a visual, but we do need more clarity. And this is a huge part that I think I've been missing. That's, like I said, I can't begin to explain how much this has been transforming. Where even if you have 2 or 10 visuals on a page, if you're describing their question and breaking down the parts of their question that they need, you can really help. And so I think this goes back to the question that we've had, almost that chicken or egg, where how many visuals are appropriate on a page. It really doesn't matter how, like, the quantity, if you're not answering the question and breaking down those
Agreed.
points.
I agree.
And more importantly, if you have not broken down the keywords, the nouns, the verbs of that question, not just are you ambiguously answering their question, but when they say how many partners are at risk, well, what's a partner? Is it since they joined? Is it the last 6 months? And at risk, are they
Yes.
already gone? Are they
Yep.
30 days? Once you have those nuggets,
Level setting the
and
language is a key
yeah,
point there. Yeah.
yeah, and it allows us to where we don't have to be technical with the user, but it's like, okay, you want at risk? Well, let's define that.
Yeah.
That helps from the visual point of view. Since I've been doing that as part of the workshops,
Mm-hmm.
oh my goodness! Like then you can have 5 or 7 visuals as long as you're helping explain those little parts of it. But you have to be able to break that down.
Agreed. I totally
I
agree with
would
that
I
one.
would almost argue within here. Not argue. I love the idea and I agree with it 100%. Over the course of time, I think it's imperative that as you dive deep into data, right? Like it's layer upon layer upon layer sometimes of like how you get down to an answer.
Yeah.
Defining that definition does great things when you can build a report. And I think, when somebody's viewing the report, right,
Hmm.
understand the context of the page. But I also think that it's extremely important to document that somewhere
Right.
else. Like, this is the report, here's this page, here's the goal of this page, or here's the definitions for this page, because you are constantly in any organization, especially with a widely used report, going to have those same conversations over and over and over again.
Hmm.
Or 6 months down the road, you're going to have to try to remember that
Yeah.
really detailed conversation. So it's really important to make sure you write that down, because that's your goalpost, right? Like that's where not the goalpost. It's like it's the base camp, right? Like everything in related to that report can start and end with that hey, let's go check that out together, right? What is that definition? I don't know, I
Yeah.
forget. Like that's on this page though, because I wrote it down.
This is really part of data culture too, where and I love that you said the documenting, because one thing I'm finding out is some of the stakeholders don't even know the answer to those questions.
Yes,
When they
true.
say, what are our top accounts? Like, we want to see our top 5 accounts. I literally, we
Yeah.
kind of brought that back. Okay, let's define that. They're like, well, and then literally had 2 people arguing, like, is it top sales? Like, no. It's people who bought this particular product over the last 6 months. And then you got an argument between 2 people in the business on what is defined as a top account, which is a perfect in the type of questions and things that we're trying to measure. If this business can't answer that type of question, how are we going to visualize it? So a lot of the barriers that I thought I had being able to visualize data had nothing to do with the visuals that were available to me, but really was my lack of understanding what we're trying to measure. And if the business can't define it, how are we?
So Tommy, like given that you 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 give us an article in ambush with your knowledge of a book, now I'm going to really lean into you.
All right.
Where do most people go wrong here, right? Where
Yeah.
are we not getting enough out of people, and like what does he say we should be doing?
I think the biggest part is where I've gone wrong all these years is I get someone's insight where we want top accounts, like, we can do that. And I'm not trying to break down their question on tying it back to a visual, or I thought that would be too technical to do, where I was trying to get someone's action. I was only focused on getting a stakeholder's action that we can do, like what action are you going to take from the report. And it was very that high level overview, and that's what I was fishing for. Then you actually go to your canvas and you kind of feel like you're at a blank slate, like, okay, let's get their action, but not trying to break down the different components of what they're trying to really do. And can you actually measure that? Again, numbers like top, at risk, over time, trending, all those things for
Yes.
that particular report. I was just trying to look for those words to build action from. But if I couldn't measure that, that's where I've gone wrong all these years, honestly.
So I like where your question went with that one, Seth, because this is something that I mean, and as I read more of the article here and just kind of mull over the ideas you guys are saying, in addition to this, from the book Making Data Visual, he calls out specifically a particular chapter called from questions to tasks, which I think is really relevant. And again, I haven't read the chapter, so I can't speak to it directly. But what I can say though is this sounds very oddly similar from insights to actions. That's how I define it. So that's a communication thing that I, ask a question I can action off of. And then later on, I think I really liked how he took the article here and he started saying, how do you teach people to ask questions that you can answer from a data visualizations? Like Tommy, to your point there, right? People will ask questions that are too generic. Hey, what's my performance over time? And I know I have heard that question enough, or have heard that statement enough, that I know I need to dig in. What does it mean by performance? Are we talking about sales? What's important to you? Volume? Like, define for me the things that we're measuring. And I mean, seriously, when people are asking these questions, I'm now thinking in a star schema model. I'm thinking about what are the cuts of the data? How do I cut the data? So I start thinking about what are my dimensions? And I actually start asking them, well, what is important about that performance over time? Do you need to see performance over time by category, by sales region, by person? What I'm asking there is I'm asking the dimensions that go around my fact table. And then in my fact table, I'm asking, well, what is performance? Like, how do we define that? Is that sum of sales, count of products sold? Like, I'm already going, like, in my mind, even though I'm not building a data model, I'm already writing down what are the things I need to aggregate? How do I calculate those? And what are the things I'm going to use to cut those aggregations by? And just using those kind of key principles, we can take these generic terms. Again, in the article, it talks about, they're talking about the New York City collision data set, something like that, right? They're talking about how did this situation change? What does that mean? There's too much. The question is too obtuse to get down to an answer, and so you have to take that. When someone says this to you, you're taking that information and saying, "Hey, wait a minute. We need to decompose this a little bit and say, okay, situation. How do we define that? What does that mean? How did the number of collisions change over time? Maybe that's how many deaths
Right.
came out of these collisions. What kind of collisions were involved? Was it a rear end? Like what are the types of
Right.
collisions? When you start asking more questions around that, you can then pull out more pieces of information. And again, I still feel like I start thinking about what are the dimensions, what are the facts, what am I aggregating, and what am I cutting it by? So that's kind of the things I'm trying to go through.
And you're dead on with the book. So I just want to give one part of the book because it's like you read the book, Mike, or you're just that intelligent.
No,
Which I'm gonna go with,
honestly, I think if you do this stuff long enough, I think you start coming to this point where like this stuff isn't profitable unless we go like, or not like, worthy or valuable. It's not valuable, and we're getting to the same answers. Like, if I can't put a visual that's not actionable in front of somebody, what good is it? Like that's
so And the book talks literally about you break a question into tasks, like different tasks, and each task has 4 components, which is basically exactly what you said. The objects, what are the objects? Is it a salesperson? Is it a store? What are the measures? What are we counting, aggregating? What are we grouping by? Or is it not just the stores, but is it a region? And what are the actions? So you're spot on. And one thing, the example in the article, which I kind of love, is he broke down this exercise, which I really want to do in some scenario or a lab, where they took a visual and they said, what's the question from this? And all the students struggled to come up with the question. And I'm thinking about all my reports where that's probably the case too. Like, what was the question trying to be asked?
Yes.
So I'm going to lean into your comments a little bit, Mike, right? Because the insight to action is, I think, what he calls construct to measure, right? In his article.
Sure.
But at the same time, the reason I want to lean into this long is you in your description, you were taking your years of experience working with business people, and bouncing back and forth, between
the dialogue,
technical, and business,
and
but this is why I want to stay here for a minute, right? Because I think a lot of people struggle and they don't understand why, because you went through like several iterations to the point where you got to the point where you're like, in the fact table, I'm thinking about how do you aggregate? And the aggregations might be something that you talk with business about. Like, how do you want to sum this together? Do you want this as an average? Like, those are easy concepts for people to understand.
Correct.
Right. But he even talks really well about the specific versus ambiguous, right? In like, you're not asking the right questions and not getting enough information. But the alternative to that is, I think, the twofold thing that I want to lay into a little bit. One is you can be too specific to the point where you lose the goal, or you completely ruin the conversation with technical jargon and you don't even realize you're doing it. If you start talking to a business user about like, okay, what I'm trying to do here is define the dimension.
I don't ever tell them that. This is what's going on in my head.
But this is what I'm like, I see this time and time again.
That's
with
true.
People who are just coming into Power BI, or have a few years, right? They know Power BI well, they can build reports, but when you start to engage them in the business, because your thoughts and your patterns are always in a very technical space, but you don't think of it as technical because it's just data.
That's the business user.
You have you always have to be cognizant of when you are having a business level conversation with anybody. Just assume that the minute you drop DAX, or, well, I can't do that because it's complex and that measure is going to be like, you're going to lose them quickly. Like you're going to scare them into not, I think, providing the level of information that you're going to find extremely valuable. And you just did a really good job of like, how do you do this? I'm thinking in the back of my head, right? All of the technical relationships of how I'm going to build this out in dimensions and facts.
I'm not explaining that to them because I'll lose them so fast.
But we'll be off in the weeds. But that's what I'm saying is,
I agree with
there is this parallel universe you're living in when you're having these conversations, because you should be thinking in the technical space. because it's going to those conversations are going to present challenges that won't work with some of the models, right? And you have to figure out like, okay,
Right.
well, how do I navigate around that, or figure out what they, what we can produce, because maybe there is an initial blocker.
Yeah.
At the same time, recognizing that you're having that part of the conversation because of technical challenges without bringing that to the forefront of the conversation.
And I love where you're going with this too, because this is the other part where people go wrong, where it's, yeah, you may have that skill set, but you're asking these questions like, so what's the primary key here? And immediately you're throwing people off.
Yep.
There's a very deadly, delicate dance that you have to do where you're listening, you're processing, and then you're to the article, you're asking the questions right for the user.
Correct.
You're not just getting the technical scope, but you're allowing
100%
them to
agree.
feel comfortable. And this is hard, Seth. I mean, this is very
But this is
difficult to do.
I
But this is why
absolutely
we have
agree.
jobs.
But
This is
that's why
Right, right,
this
right,
is
right.
why
But this
this
is
is
Yeah.
why
not
I'm
an
a
easy
huge
skill.
huge proponent of learning how to take notes well,
Yes.
Oh yes.
because these levels of conversation require you to go back and
Right.
just replay and reorganize the thoughts and notes into the digestible tasks that you're going to go execute on. And I can't imagine trying to do this mentally, right?
Oh, I
Like
write it down. Oh, for sure.
have an hour long meeting defining requirements or like what somebody needs and not write anything down.
Oh, that would
Yeah.
that'd be horrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I do this process where I walk through, like, there's like a 3-step process that I do now that kind of like walks you through like how to get from that initial discussion. This is what I used to do when I work at other consulting firms. When we were in person, we'd take sticky notes and I would have everyone write down their ideas, because I know this process happens, right? I mean, in the room with the business users, we would have post-it notes, and I'd just ask everyone, write a question down, right? Just anything's a good idea. Write it down. Just get it on paper. Get it on paper. We put it on a post-it note, and we put these post-it notes up on the wall. It could be anything about the business, the data. You may know the data. You may not know the data. Just ask questions about information that you think would be useful to you to do your daily job. What are the questions that you have to do or figure out daily to make you do a successful whatever you're
Right.
doing, right? Drive the business forward. Once you have all these questions, you then you step back and start saying, okay, how do we group these insights? How do we group these questions into key areas?
Right.
And then once you have these key areas identified, here, this is about sales, this is about HR, this is about, manufacturing, here's about supply chain, right? Okay, now that we've got generalized topics, let's hone into a couple of these things and then even further refine them. Okay, here's questions. Let's start talking about, if I ask this question, what would be my next action? And I think that when you place the what is my action after having the answer to this question, it really helps people narrow down, like, oh, I guess I really don't need a very large table with all the columns in it. No, you don't.
Sure.
Like, that's not what we're looking for,
Right.
right? I keep explaining this, and we've talked about this before, where your data model, you could think of it as one large Excel table. It's just one massive table. The relationships make it so you could pull everything together. At the end of the day, do you need to see every single record of that? No. What are you trying to roll up? What are you trying, like, of that whole big Excel sheet? Where is the important data? You need to filter out a lot of information, a lot of noise, to focus in on what's important. And so I think that's where things get really interesting for me.
Right. Well, I think that what Seth is saying, there's a whole other level of when someone's talking, you have to process not only what the technical side, the data model, and then also you have to process, do I need a clarifying question from here or break
That's
this
true.
down?
Yeah.
Right, while someone's talking, but then you also have to remember to also talk, reply to what they're saying.
True.
Like
Yeah.
this, and I think the more you guys are talking about this, and the more it's processing in my own head, that this skill that we're talking about, which I think is I don't want to call it a soft skill. I really want to put this part of my ability to be visualize data is not so much of my ability as a creative person or just from a a canvas point of view, is my ability to really be able to do this, what we're talking about here.
True.
It's and almost there's more ability on being able to ask that question right, process at the same time, and then be able to lead up with another question all at the same time allows me to be better at visualizing data. Not so much my ability to put the bar chart in the right X and Y coordinate.
you're speaking to like a deeper level skill set here, right? It's a while it maybe I can go read the book about how to build the visual, right?
Right.
I can read the technical pieces on how to make a visual happen in Power BI, but to have the skill set to empathize with the report person asking the questions, you need to have empathy for them, sit in their shoes, interpret what they're saying to you, because what they're giving you, again, we said this a number of times. Not everyone knows what they want until they see it, right? You give them this report and you're like, that doesn't really help me. Like that doesn't. So a lot of the times I feel like if you don't do this journey properly, if you don't walk them through this scenario of here's the things that we think are important, here's how we're going to address that, here's the insights, here's the action I expect to take off of seeing this data point, here's what I may do, and so it helps frame more of the more of the question.
Well, would you guys make the argument or be pro that adopting this into your stakeholder this okay, let's define what you try to say and saying that in a very, let's say, high level or friendly way where you're the translator, that can really help avoid those problems?
I think in general, yeah, right. Like if you're,
Yeah.
I think what this is kind of pushing forward is, you're a couple things. One is preparation for the conversation,
Hmm.
right? Familiarize
Yeah.
yourself with an area, because it the second part of that is taking a learning tone, right?
Yeah.
If you're engaging with somebody and taking on okay, we're going to solve these problems for you, right? Like today, I need to understand your business. I need to understand this need. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions, like pushing for definitions of things, etc. Right? Because then that opens the door and takes down that barrier of, I think, where a lot of like people who are asking the questions don't ask enough because they either don't know which questions to ask or which paths to pursue, or they're they I think innately everybody has a tendency to feel like they should just know something, right? And
Yeah.
they don't. So like taking on a learning stance of like, hey, I'm here to learn all about this, right? I'm not as familiar, right? And then drive for those definitions so you understand them before getting into the deeper stuff. I in terms of like helping or um getting what I need out of the questions, right? I find that even if I don't understand or can't specify the question the right way, because it certainly seems like Enrico spends a lot of time thinking about the question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And defining that. And that's what we're talking to. I think a shortcut there potentially is, well, maybe it's not. Preparation for the conversation is probably spending a lot of time in ensuring that those questions are accurate and provide us the level of information we need.
Right.
If you still don't, though, and you'll know because either you're not getting the responses you're looking for or it's dead air, right? Like you ask something, they're like, um, I've
Yeah.
found I've found it very effective to ask people to walk me through their process or
Yes.
walk me
Mm,
through the
Show
steps.
me.
that's
Show me how it's
Take me,
going
yeah.
on.
you know,
Yeah.
take a before and after of needing the information, whatever the case may be. But it takes it out of the realm of Q&A, right? I'm asking the questions, you have to answer them, to
How did you get to there?
to a description of action, right?
Right.
You're doing something on a daily basis, right? If you already have a predefined process, walk me through the process. What are you doing in Excel? Like, and then dude, that's a treasure trove.
Yes.
Like they're not manual, automate, do all these things, etc. But even if they don't have a predefined process, it's, well, walk me through like what you need this report to provide this
Yeah.
information, and there's value in that for you, right? But what are you doing beforehand, and what are you doing after if I provide this information to you? And then people start talking about their day to day, right? Oh,
Hmm.
well, and it's very easy for them to put themselves into, their experiential zone, as
Their comfort
opposed
zone.
to,
Yeah.
I'm having a conversation. I need to be able to like tell him
Right.
everything I need, so that while you're thinking technical in this conversation, they're thinking this conversation and their business,
Mm-hmm.
or
Right.
what they're going to do with it, right? And we're trying to like bridge that gap completely, so that all parties, well, but at least start with this conversation and you understand their realm. I don't think they're going to really get yours, but
Well,
that's
no, I mean,
the
yeah,
goal is you want to, and that's where we talk about empathy, I think, right? You
and
want to get into their
Yes,
space.
I agree.
and that's also a great part too, where if you get a lag in that scoping where they can't answer it, you just ask, how do you get to top accounts now? And they're like, oh, well, this person provides it to me. Like, okay, we'll take that offline so you can continue that
Yeah.
conversation.
Parking lot,
Parking
follow up
lot,
with so and
right,
so.
right.
Yeah, exactly right.
I want to quickly backtrack. Mike, you were talking about something earlier that I think is very important to this, where we're obviously this ability to dive into the questions and break it down. But briefly, how do we also know too, where I think the other pitfall here is, how do we know when it's too much? Because honestly, this exercise you can infinitely do with any question. Like, show me what are top accounts over time. You can break that down constantly into different tasks, into different operations, and different proxies.
Mm.
How do we also know with the user that this is it? This is the end of the road, where you're not going to say like, oh, based on what region, where that's too much.
Agreed. So I think this is one of these areas where you could slow things down immensely and just beat up these questions and make sure you have
Yeah.
like almost like a waterfall approach, right? You have every single thing detailed out. You've got everything exhausted. You've gone through all the information. You have this very clear answered for what you're going to deliver. I think that takes a bit too long. I think the business in general wants to move quicker than that. And so when I do these kind of exercises, I find it's more valuable to put something in front of someone's eyes and clearly say, here's a handful of questions. We're going to just address 3 or 4 or 5 of them initially, and that's
Mhm.
enough. Let's just start there. Get the report done, get something that they can react to, get it in their hands and let them use the report. I don't like how this works. I'm missing information over here, right? I don't like to think of it as a one and done scenario. I like to think of it as build a report, get some value out of it, give it to them, because again, this is one of these situations where I feel like I have the conversation often. You don't know what you don't know, right? And with them using the report, yeah, it might answer a couple initial questions, but there's always another layer of questions. And I think this also evolves. Once you've answered the basic initial questions, there's always another a layer of that onion you unpeel, and you're like, well, I have another whole, because of what you told me, I now have another whole list of other questions that are now
Right.
deeper than what I was talking about before. And you didn't even know to ask those questions. Like, well, why is this sales guy performing so much better than everyone else? How do we understand and break down his data? At the beginning, we were just trying to figure out if the whole company sales were up or down. Now we're actually honing in on specific things, or, you know, something you observe in the data is questionable, or, like, I don't really know if that's right. Does that make sense?
Right.
And then you're asking a whole other layer of questions to answer other insightful pieces. And so I think it's more the iterative process. Build the report, hand it over, get some usage, get some feedback, see what we need to change or add or enhance, and then just kind of keep going back and forth. And then hopefully over time you figure out what you need. At some point, and this is, I know it's a totally side note, I really think there's two kind of key requests. There is show me an answer, an action based on data. Just let me show up, let me look at it. I click on stuff, boom, it's there. The other is I need access to data. And I'm finding a lot more people recently just needing access to the data. I just can't see it. And so I find a lot of requests and reports are around build me this table, get me these columns, let me add my stuff that I need to, just so I can get access to the data.
Mhm.
And so one of the things I'm doing more frequently and how I'm changing my behavior a little bit is, what are we really doing here? Are you requesting access or are you requesting insights? Based on that information really defines, oh, we're going down the paginating report route, or no, oh, we're going to go build a data model. So yeah, Kevin asks, how often are they asking for export, right? I mean, I think to me that's an indicator right away that you don't really. I shouldn't be spending tons of time building fancy visuals and backgrounds and all kinds of other things. Instead, I should be just figuring out, okay, what is the information that you need, and how do I get you access to that easily?
I think a couple key points, right? I agree with you 100%, but I think that iteration goes i- is defined in two different ways, right? You're defining like iterate for like provide a report to the business user to see if they like it, drive towards the next level of um, what they want to see.
Mm-hmm.
But that you're doing that as well. And I think it's important where even in the comments section of the article,
Yep.
somebody, in a pretty aggressive way, it was like, well, that's not how this should work. Like, you should iterate. And he agreed, right? Like, if you approach these initial conversations, it should be under the guise of iteration, because what's going to happen is you're going to take the information you glean and you're going to analyze it and put it through this lens
Yes.
towards the goal that you've set forward.
Hmm.
And you're going to have more questions.
Yes.
Right. But you can bring those questions to that first iteration, right? Where you're, this is what we produce based on the first conversation. Here's the visuals, here's the report. I also have these questions, right? As fill in the gaps, iterate, fill in the gaps, iterate. But to your point, Tommy, what is too much? I think that's where one of the key tenets before we started this conversation comes in.
Mhm.
You have to define a goal.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have a goal, then yes, you can boil the ocean with a single report, right? And it'll be 20 tabs long, or 20 canvas pages, or
And
whatever we want
then
to
it
call
becomes
it.
And
unusable.
one frustrated
And it's
stakeholder.
not useful.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Because you never will have solved the problem because
Right.
you never defined the problem in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the skill. It's
Oh,
not
so
just
good.
being able to
Yes.
do it, but also knowing where that limit is, or okay, we have sufficiently gotten the information we need. Do you? My last kind of question on this is: do you think this is a skill that's either unknown or is not really around in the Power BI space? Not because we've always talked about the inside side, but to me, this article, like I said, was very novel and not necessarily a lot of conversations I've had around this. Again, maybe I've been under a rock. It could also be my own intelligence level, not very high. But do you find this skill that we're talking about? I don't know what we'd actually define this skill as something that's not as prevalent in the Power BI space, at least with developers that we talk to.
I think this skill is not very prevalent in any data space, frankly.
Interesting.
This is a blazing gap in
Interesting.
a lot of analysts. So the reason I say this is because again, this is one of the things I went to. I went to this thing called Delta Bronze Associates. So Delta Associates is a company that focuses on marketing. Basically, it's a marketing. They work on doing advanced Excel analytics skills around finding your market share on whatever products they are. I have an article on Power BI Tips that talks about my experience with working with their training program. I thought it was amazing. I would say it pretty much fundamentally changed my career because I was focusing primarily on engineering at the time. I went through this class and I thought data is where it's at. This is amazing. So going through their bronze, and now I think they call it their black belt or something like that. It's their class has changed slightly, but I highly recommend checking it out because it goes through these detailed things. It starts talking about concepts of like position and direction, right? Our sales has a position. We've sold X amount of sales right now, but without giving it context of, yeah, you sold $1.2 million of product. Okay. Was that good? Are we trending up? Are we trending down? Where do I focus my effort? And so it gave me a lot of practical examples around, and it was a good foundation. Like it wasn't talking about tabular models. It wasn't talking about Power BI. This was all before then. But I still to this day, I still use a lot of those concepts from that class to help me frame out my thinking around what of all the information we have, how do I identify which is the most impactful? Look at all the categories across your company and figure out year over year, month over month, whatever the time comparison is, what's the percent change? And so what I'm trying to identify is what is the largest amount of sales in my company and has had the largest amount of percent change, right? I may have, a Pareto chart of all my categories in my company. And if the largest business units are losing the most amount of money, that's where I should focus my time. Like a lot of times in business, we focus on percent changes that are large, but we lose the context of how big is the impact of my business. Anyways,
Blazing gap.
What I formed a lot of my opinions around has been really highly informed by that class. I thought those guys were absolutely incredible. The guy who runs it, he's a PhD, studies this stuff, really has done tons of training, super enthusiastic, loved it, and I would highly recommend it to anyone. I'll see if I can get the article because actually I talked through my experience through it and how that class changed my career, the direction of where I was going. So
Seth, so
There's a lot of
blazing
things.
gap.
There's a
That's
lot of things that have changed your career. Not
this
just
is
this
true.
one.
well, I mean,
Well,
this is one.
that's a pretty big word though to say blazing gap.
I think it's large. I mean, they say after their based on what their studying is, anyone who goes to this class, you are at a 95 or 90% level. Like if you take all the people doing analytical things after going to their class, they're like you're probably about at the top 95% of the top analytical leaders after going to this class, because many people, data analysts, business analysts, whatever you want to call them, can't identify. If you just give them a table of data and say, tell me what's the most impactful piece of this, where should I focus my time and effort, right? We can't do everything all the time. So the fact that you have a class that can help you really formulate your mind around those things, just it just tells me like the industry in general needs more education around this kind of stuff. There's just not enough people talking about it at this point.
No. Seth, do you see I do agree, but Seth, do you also see a blazing gap?
I think we pause. I think this shines a light on what we are bringing, right? Which is this is a soft skill, right? Most of the the content out there is technical in nature. It's very technical, right? And this is one of the key components to making sure that we're doing our job right is communication. A component of that is what Mike's talking about, which is impact, right? Like,
Yes.
and this course in particular, experience does that when you're working in the business and understanding the impacts of the business. You're always driving for
Mhm.
like, great, you want to see this visual, but why, right? And I think a lot of the but why and actions part, if led by somebody who's driving for what is this supposed to do for you, and if
Right.
that's what that class does for you, it's fantastic, right?
Yep.
Absolutely. I think many people in organizations don't or are not aware of how their choices impact the business, and if you're thinking in that direction, you'll land in good spaces. But 100%, like Mike came out of that class, and I remember a long time ago, everything position and direction, like
All the
what we're
time.
doing, like, but it does it helps you get into the right framework of what are the things you're driving at
Right.
definition and defining. So I would say communication 100%. Like, this is absolutely an essential skill, because as you go through this with engaging to try to understand what you're supposed to build, right? It's clarity and purpose of goal. It's we're shining a light on that communication, but I also think that along with defining questions and answers, there's the soft skill of communicating with people, because you have to work around personalities here as well,
Hmm.
right? It's You're not going to get the same type of conversation every single time. Some people hate the Q&A kind of thing. Some people, so how do you goad and get somebody to talk about their business, or like, there's a lot of different refinement that takes a lot of practice. And I think the more time you spend on it, and this is a good conversation, because it's like, hey, maybe you're being really sloppy with your questions. Why don't you, like, take a moment, think about how you're approaching the business or these interactions. If you're not getting what you need from an informational standpoint, maybe your questions are too ambiguous. Maybe they're too specific. Maybe they're not engaging. Maybe you're not engaging, right? And
Right.
when we, I think, give more thought to our particular situations and our business, this is a fun conversation, because already, right, I have a ton of things that I'm going to take back. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I could totally do this and this and this next time. And I think that's the
Right.
value behind it.
I think I am going to be in the side of the argument that this is not a soft skill as much it is this goes into your Power BI matrix of data visualization. Like if I were to say
The skills
what
matrix.
skill
Yeah.
is this? Yeah, in the skills matrix where
Yeah.
this is not another category. Because
I would agree.
because you can't separate this and your ability to visualize data. If you're not able to extract the right question, yeah. If any of us,
Yep.
you get 100 people who had the perfect question, we could all put a bar chart in the right place, right?
Correct.
That's not difficult to do in Power BI. I don't need the skill in SSRS. It's a drag and drop. But to me, to get from question to that bar chart is a huge, and that's not separate from the data visualization skill.
I'd agree. I
Well,
think they're closely
yeah.
intertwined. I think they're very much
I wouldn't even
related.
say they're intertwined. They're one and the same, especially dealing with Power BI. That's going to be my side of the argument, though.
Yeah. I liked how he framed the question here. I think one of the areas I think that was very relevant and I think rings true for me is time with the data helps you inform the better questions. Because you can ask questions all day long of what you want to
Oh, for
accomplish,
sure.
but like unless the data can actually support those questions, towards the end of the article he started said, and as particularly in the comments of the article, he talks about yeah, if you ask the right question, well, you'll ask questions at the beginning that you don't really know if they can be
Right.
answered or not until you start really getting into the information in the data. And there's, wow, these columns don't have enough data in them. I can't ask questions about that stuff. That's not helpful. So really, again, this is why I feel like it's like a tug of war a little bit between asking the questions and then working with the data and asking more questions and then kind of going back and forth a bit. So I definitely feel like that for me, that's what came out of the article more for me was keep doing that, keep driving for action, and then keep playing that game of pushing on the data to get the answers out. Well, I think we've actually hit a pretty good moment here. We've burned through another full hour here. Our only ask for watching the podcast is if you like this conversation, if you found value from it, please share it on social media or someone at a coworker. Just let them know, hey, I was listening to this podcast. It was interesting. I got a couple laughs out of it, and or I learned something from it as well. So we appreciate your listenership. We thank you very much for your participation. For those of you who are on the YouTube chat, chatting away, thank you very much. We appreciate your comments and your participation in the podcast. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find the podcast anywhere they're available on YouTube or Apple and Spotify, Overcast, Google Podcasts. Also, if what really helps us out, we don't get any money from this, but we love for more people to listen just so we can have a better production here for you guys. Spread the word,
Yes, please.
share it on your social medias platforms or with people you know, or email, or however you communicate with people nowadays. We'd really appreciate that. If you want to listen live, YouTube on 7:30 a.m. to Tuesdays and Thursdays. Make sure to subscribe, join us, watch for the videos, join the conversation.
And if you have ideas and something you'd like to have us talk about, go to Power BI Tips/podcast. And there's a form that you can fill out there that we'll submit, and it'll get information directly to us about your topic or things that you're thinking about around Power BI as well. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you on Thursday.